Did you know that according to the Mayo Clinic, letting go of grudges and bitterness can make way for improved health and peace of mind? Forgiveness can lead to healthier relationships, improved mental health, less anxiety, stress, and hostility, fewer symptoms of depression, lower blood pressure, a stronger immune system, improved heart health, and improved self-esteem. And yet, while all of that sounds great, forgiveness is not easy. Staying angry feels safe. It feels justified. And honestly, it feels necessary sometimes. In this episode, I want to take you deep into the realm of forgiveness with Dr. Carron Silva, who reminds us that forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you, and that forgiveness is not done alone.
Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Persistence in Prayer podcast hosted by Catholic mindset coach, wife, mother, educator, and speaker Kylie Hine. Kylie is passionate about helping you deepen your relationship with God through the power of prayer. This podcast is a space for high achievers who want to do it all, but also want to prioritize their spiritual life and grow in faith. Join us as we explore the beauty of persistence in prayer and the transformative impact it can have on our lives. Get ready to discover practical tips, insights, and inspiration to help you develop a daily prayer practice and cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's plan for your life. Let's journey together towards a more fulfilled and faithful life as we invite the Holy Spirit in. Let's begin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am so excited for this episode. I am joined today by Dr. Carron Silva. She is a mom, a wife of 31 years to her husband, Steve. She's a Catholic mindset coach, speaker, and podcaster on the topic of forgiveness. As a trauma recovery coach and forgiveness guide, she helps individuals navigate through emotionally challenging life situations and cultivate resilience. In her spare time, you can find her doing home improvement projects with her husband, experimenting with sourdough, enjoying the outdoors, reading, and knitting. And I am also going to add, Carron, that I think you are a prayer warrior as well. The first time I ever met you was actually, we were in a prayer group or a prayer request chat, and someone put out a request, and you immediately just jumped on and said, "Hey, who wants to jump on Zoom and pray a Divine Mercy Chaplet?" And that was the first time I ever met you, was praying a Divine Mercy Chaplet with you and your husband. So I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we do it every night. We've been doing the Divine Mercy Chaplet now. We've been praying it together, my husband and I, for our family, for our communities, for our friends, every night for, I would say, almost 2 years now.
That is so beautiful. And actually, since I prayed with you guys that night, I think I've been a little more consistent in praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. I pray the Rosary daily, but the Divine Mercy Chaplet, I'm definitely incorporating more often than I used to. And it started back when we prayed that together. So I'm so grateful for you for that.
That's great. I didn't know.
Yeah. See, you never know how the little things we do are going to impact someone else.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we get into a more serious topic, I have to ask for all of the other, I always want to try anything and everything new people listening who are like myself. How difficult is it really to keep up with your sourdough starter?
I'm one of those people, I'm not super technical with it, and I cheat a lot.
Yeah.
There are some people who are like, they're into the science of sourdough. I am more of the, let's see what I can get away with.
Oh,
So I feed once a week and I discard maybe, I don't know, I just keep track of like how much is in there and how much I want to feed. I don't feed it like my sourdough is on a diet.
yeah.
I don't feed it in the ratios that they recommend. I just want to keep it alive. And when I don't want to work with it, I leave it in the refrigerator and I check it to see if anything's going on. I sniff it. If it doesn't smell too much like alcohol, I'm good. If it starts smelling a little bit too much like alcohol, I'm like, oh, you're getting hungry. I talk to it all the time. It's like my friend now. Actually, I've got 3 jars in the fridge right now. So one, sometimes I just use it straight out of the fridge. I don't do a levain. I don't do all of the things. I just take whatever's in the jar, measure it out, then bake it. I make discard things. So like tortillas are easy, right? And we love tortillas. I make a lot of discard sourdough tortilla.
That's
And
awesome.
and then I have a rye one in another jar with whole wheat with all-purpose flour. And I just kind of monitor how much I want to keep in my jar. And then I bake about once to two times a month right now because I'm very busy and there's only two of us in the house. But my husband's colleagues are always like, "When is your wife baking again?"
That's so funny. I had a priest friend and he had gotten some women together to teach them how to do sourdough and he was going to do another round so I could come join. And then he got moved. So he had to transfer parishes before I was able to learn. So I always have to ask when I see someone's doing sourdough.
Yes, and I have a coaching client who actually her dream was to build a sourdough baking business, and I walked her through like from the concept to now starting to do the actual. So I have a sourdough coach.
You are a woman of many talents. And I think you could also be a coach for a multitude of topics. How did you settle on the topic of forgiveness as your personal mission?
I'm going to blame God through my local parish priest because I had written a book. We had just moved to Austin in November of 21. And so we had this festival of lights at the church in December. And that was the first time we met our priest in person. And I said, "Father, I wrote a book. I want to share it with you." And so I shared him an advance copy of my book. It's a devotional, it's an autobiographical devotional. And I shared the copy of my book. And he said, "And you're going to do a retreat for me during Lent, right?" And I was like, he goes, "You can use your book." So I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And I went to adoration with it. I sat in front of the Lord and I said, "Lord, you just asked me to do this thing. I can't say no to my priest. I can't say no to you. So what do you want me to do?" And over a period of about a month of going to adoration weekly, this idea of the thought of forgiveness just kept coming back. And he showed me which readings to use from my book and how to build the retreat. And I wrote the outline in adoration. And then I just put together the presentation and I sent the bulletin insert information to my priest. And then he made sure it got into the bulletin. And he said, "You can make as many copies as you want. When do you want to do it?" And we just scheduled it. So the first Saturday of Lent 2020, I went to the church ready to go. My husband was my sidekick doing all the tech, and 70 people showed up.
Wow.
And that was my first forgiveness retreat. And it was just so impactful because afterwards, Father and I did a debrief, and he said he had people coming for reconciliation who had not been to reconciliation for years. And he said, "You need to keep doing this work." I have done 4 retreats at my parish now, 4 different retreats, not all on forgiveness. And I've done some around Austin at another parish, couple of parishes, the university parish and another parish. And I've done a couple online. And then I've started a podcast. And I kept saying, "Lord, I really don't know if this is the right, topic for me." And he just kept saying to me, I just kept hearing this, "You have to stick with this, as hard as it might be," because my own story speaks to forgiveness, right? The number of people in my life who I have had to forgive, that list is very long. I was I was really struggling with forgiveness for a long time. I would say a couple of decades, at least 20 years
Wow.
for some other people. And in fact, just last month, I was working through something that I had held in my heart for 30 years, something that had happened to me in college and that I had to have some crucial conversation about two very close family members. And again, a lot of this was in front of the Blessed Sacrament and working on the scripts for my podcast and going, Carron, you're putting yourself out there telling people to forgive. But what about this thing that you're still holding close to your heart that you're not letting go of? How can you go and tell other people they need to do these things and yet you're still holding out on this one thing? And it was heart-wrenching for me. I do the first Friday devotions, not always every single part of it because things happen, but I always try to do going to reconciliation and adoration every month at the beginning of the month. And I brought this to Father, this particular issue. And I said, Father, I feel like a fake.
Yeah.
I have this issue in my heart and I don't want to forgive. I'm so angry still, it's 30 years later. And he said, you are a missionary disciple. It doesn't mean you're doing everything perfectly. It is through your struggle that you are going to help other people heal. And,
Absolutely.
oh, okay, I'll take that.
Yeah, I think the thing that we struggle with the most is really where God calls us to help other people because you have to live it, you have to experience it to know how to help other people and walk with them through it. So, can you just describe to us what is forgiveness?
Oh my goodness. I have 2 podcast episodes on this. Forgive, really, in a nutshell, is relinquishing the right to hold someone else accountable, the right to justice. If I can say that in a nutshell.
Yeah,
When we get hurt, we want the other person to feel what we are feeling, to experience the damage that they have done, to see us in our pain. We want them to pay. That's our natural inclination, right? But it makes us a prisoner. That bondage that we take on is to that person, and it blocks grace from God. Because now we have that person, that offender, the perpetrator, whoever hurt us, standing in between us and God. Because our focus is no longer on God, our focus is on that person. But if we say, you did this to me, I'm never going to be able to reclaim the person I was before you did this to me, no matter what happens to you. And I take my focus and I go to the Lord and I say, Lord, only you can restore what was. Not perhaps if it was a physical injury, if someone, hurt me in a way that my body was damaged in any way, if it's a mental health issue, if, for example, I am a complex post-traumatic trauma survivor, there are parts of me that I am going to work on until I die. Those parts are going to have trouble trusting people for the rest of my life. But if I keep going back to the Lord, He's just going to take every little time that I come back to Him, I'm going to get better. I'm going to be a little bit more trusting. I'm going to be a little bit more whole. I'm going to be a little bit more holy.
Mm,
And so He's going to use my trauma to bring me back to Him. He's going to do the same thing with my perpetrator, but here's the linchpin. Only if both of us are willing to repent, because I can sin in my victimhood.
ooh,
And the way that I sin in my victimhood is through judgment of someone else's soul and their character. I can judge their behavior, but I cannot judge them as a person. I
Right.
can choose based on the judgment of their behavior what kind of relationship I want to have with them. Right? I don't have to be in a relationship with someone who's going to harm me repeatedly or who has harmed me. I can forgive. I can relinquish my desire for justice and I can say, I forgive you. But it doesn't mean that I have to accept you in my circle, in my inner circle. And I think a lot of people, especially in religious circles, feel an obligation to forgive. So that's another whole other can of worms. Forgiveness should never happen under an obligation. It should never be a mandate. It's always an act of the will, made in freedom and made out of love. The kind of love that only God can grant us, because it's the kind of love that sees the humanity of the person who hurt us.
I have two follow-up questions, and I don't know what the best order to ask them in is, so I will let you choose. So one is, how is forgiveness related to trauma? Because I know this is something that you speak on a lot. And the second one is, how do we know when we've forgiven someone?
Let's go with the first one.
Okay. So how is forgiveness related to trauma?
Forgiveness is how I see forgiveness play out in trauma healing is it's that final step that sets you free. I have been in therapy off and on for a very long time. I started therapy in 1992 when I had just gotten married and everything came out. I was sexually abused as a young child. I was about 3 years, 4 years old. It was a very violent act. And I watched a lot of domestic violence in my home. And throughout, the years, it was more than one person, more than one occasion, sort of like with a very, very traumatic childhood. And so when I came to the United States from South Africa, where nobody was safe, in 1990, I met my husband actually the very first week of arriving in the United States.
Wow.
And we got married a year later. We got married, and while we were in marriage preparation, my sexual abuse history came out in full force. And at that point in time, I entered therapy. And I have, believe me, experienced so many different modalities of therapy because my trauma was so severe. And even with all of that, mostly secular therapy, there was still something missing. And alongside that, my faith grew stronger. I converted to Catholicism shortly after we got married. And as my faith grew, my understanding of justice evolved. And, there's criminal justice where we can go and make a case against someone in the courts and we can get justice that way, but that's not always possible. But does that actually free you? Knowing that someone is in jail, does it free you from the emotional bond that you have to the perpetrator? I would argue that it doesn't. And so you can re-traumatize yourself by staying in that place of reliving what happened to you, or you can take that trauma and you can walk through it with Jesus Christ at your side because he's already done it. He's already carried the weight with you. I think for me, the very first time that I realized that I needed to forgive was when I was working through a memory of that original childhood sexual abuse on my own. And I asked Jesus, where were you when this was happening to me? And he showed me where he was. And I thought he was going to show me that he was with me alone. But what I saw was that he was with me and he was with my perpetrator at the same time. And he was deeply saddened for both of us. And that's when I could start seeing why my perpetrator was doing what he was doing to me. And I could start humanizing him.
Mm.
That was the beginning of my understanding of what forgiveness does. Is it humanizes the other person and it allows me to make a decision to let go, to not try to control what happens with them. And that's how I think when we work through the pain in a therapeutic environment, that's great. But without Jesus showing us where he was and where that grace is being infused and how he can heal, I think that we can spend all I did it for almost 30 years spinning the wheels in therapeutic circles. It wasn't until I could see how God can take that pain and transform it into something good. That's why I'm here. He has transformed it into something good. Right?
Which is faith. Faith is believing that he can and will do that because that's what he tells us.
Yes.
All things for your good.
Yes. Yes. So I think that for those of us who have experienced a lot of trauma, it can be so easy to lose hope because they tell you in therapeutic circles, oh, you're never going to be able to be healed because you have this mental illness or this thing that you're struggling with. In my case, it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, perhaps to an extent that's true, because there's always going to be triggers. There's always going to be activations that my senses are going to take in, and my brain is going to go, whoa, you're not safe. You're not safe.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that when we can work through that process of understanding our perpetrator, understanding their story, understanding how they could have come to see us as someone that they could harm, and then get to that place where we can relinquish our sense of wanting justice, that is freedom. That's freedom.
Trusting that vindication that you are seeking is not supposed to come from you. Yeah.
Comes from the Lord. It's not from us. He is the ultimate just judge. And I also had to come to an understanding that I may someday meet that person in heaven. For what they did to me, they may repent. They may have repented. In my case, that person is dead. I don't know what happened. I don't know if that person repented. But I may meet them in heaven. And what a glorious day, right? For both of us to be there. That's safe.
What a question to just open up our minds to just think about and consider, is that person that hurt me and wounded me so deeply, and to want that for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard you say earlier, you got to a point where you said you needed to forgive. I'm curious, when you work with clients, because we know the power of words and the thoughts in our mind, the difference between I want to forgive and getting to the point of I need to forgive.
Yes. The need, I think, often comes from feeling completely burdened and being tired of holding on.
Mm.
So it's like, when you get to the point of, I really need to do this, but I don't want to.
Yes.
I find myself doing that when it is a case of I have a wound, I've been carrying it for a long time. It's become my friend. It's become a part of me. But I know I need to deal with it. My life could look so much different. It could be so much better. But do I want to expend the energy that it's going to take to do the work? And forgiveness is work. It's emotional work. It's draining. It's hard on the body. It's hard on the mind. It impacts how you interact with the people around you. And yeah, I think that needing is the heart going, hey, it's time. And then that in the mind going, but I don't want to.
I think anyone who's ever been on an extended silent retreat can relate to what you just said. There's a lot of, often, at least for me, and a lot of people that I know, so much emotion in those first few days of the silence of doing that work. And it is exhausting. I find myself needing to go take a nap sometimes because there's only so much that our body can mentally and emotionally handle at a given point.
Yes, and I talk about how our healing occurs at the intersection of science and faith, right? So we know that our brains are actually changing when we are doing this work. Those old neural pathways have to be rewired or reconstructed to express the new way we are going to be. And so physically, we are actually physically changing. Our thoughts are becoming biology. Our beliefs are becoming biology. So when we feel tired, it's because there's a lot of energy going into being made new, becoming that new creation of God. Absolutely.
But at the end, there's the hope
Yes.
and the freedom.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
With women, do you find that they have more difficulty forgiving others or forgiving themselves?
Definitely forgiving themselves. What I talked about earlier, the thing that I worked through just a month ago from an experience that I had over 30 years ago, for all this time, the reason why it was so hard for me was because I blamed myself for putting myself in that situation. And yet it wasn't my fault. The other person still had the freedom to choose whether they do that or not. And so that's the hard part, right? Is that going back and doing the analysis and arriving at that conclusion that, oh, it must have been me. And that is totally, totally a false belief. And it's planted there by the enemy. Because the enemy doesn't want us to believe that we are good.
I find that in small things too, how easy it is to blame ourselves I see that in my own life. I'll be so frustrated with something, and it will have been a series of events, and my husband will ask me what's wrong. I'm like, "I'm just frustrated with myself because I allowed myself to get into this situation, to be taken advantage of or whatever it was." And I would agree with that. I definitely have more difficulty forgiving myself than other people.
Yes, and that again is just, that invitation to the Lord to come in and show you the truth. What is the truth here, and what are the lies, and renouncing those lies and embracing the truth about what truly happened, or you know what is it in me that I can't see the truth about myself. And I'm a work in progress every day.
Hey, beautiful soul. This is Kylie. Do you feel like you've lost yourself in the hustle and bustle of doing all of the things? Do you have plans but can't seem to follow through on any of them because life keeps getting in the way? Are you feeling overwhelmed by a health struggle, a difficult relationship, or even your own expectations? I have 2 spots opening up in July for one-to-one coaching. You can join me for a single-month journey or 12 weeks of essential growth in prayer, relationships, and don't worry, even in your high achievement category. Click the link in the show notes to get signed up for a free confidence and clarity call to see if we're a good fit and to ensure you're getting my best summer deals. I'll see you soon, friend. What helps us to identify those wounds where we need to forgive?
I've spent so many years, I have about 30 years worth of journals. I journal. I haven't lately every single day, but I journal regularly. And seeing yourself on paper is one way to kind of start looking at patterns. And the people around you will tell you. I mean, if you're in a relationship with someone, you'll pretty much know what you need to be working on, or where your heart is hardened, and you can look at your behavior, like how do you behave towards people? You can examine your thoughts, you can interrogate your thoughts. And actually, things show up in places where you don't expect. Sometimes you think, oh, I need to forgive this person. And then it turns out to be someone completely different in that same situation. When I was looking back on the trauma that I experienced, I focused almost entirely on the perpetrator who did that original act. And I gave everybody else a pass around him. And as I dug deeper into the situation, my hardened heart almost expanded and became harder towards the people around that person, because I could see how that person was neglected as a child. And so you can go back generationally and see the patterns of the hardened heart and the violence that happened, or whatever it was. In my case, it was violence. And then you can see how even in your own life, you've carried on this attitude or this belief about people that you maybe generalized. And so it's very complicated. It's not black and white.
I think it's just like you said earlier, it goes back to seeing the humanness of the person that hurt you, and
Yeah.
that they have many wounds too. And those wounds have led to your wounds, and all of the ways that we can trace that back.
Yes. And it's, for some of us, we have the skills, or we learn the skills to process early, or we use coping mechanisms that are not destructive, or we make a vow. For example, I made a vow that my children would not know spanking. They would not know any kind of verbal abuse. They would feel safe in our home. And so it's a vow, right? some people don't have the ability or the maturity to make that vow to change the trajectory of the pattern that's existent in their family. And so they carry on that pattern. It may not even be conscious, it could be completely subconscious. So I think awareness is key here. Self-awareness. Like, when am I holding a grudge? When am I being unfair in my judgment toward people? When am I repeating? Have you ever heard yourself or say, oh my gosh, I sounded just like my mom? Or, oh my gosh, I just sounded just like my dad.
My sister and I say that all the time.
Yes, because those are subconscious patterns that have been passed on to you because our brains are raised inside a community, right? We are communal people. And so our brains are wired in the community and we automatically pick up on those patterns of behavior. And so if you have had someone in your life who was harsh, who didn't forgive easily, it's very possible that you've picked up on that pattern.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have brought up patterns on this podcast before because one of the things when I was drawing connections between mathematics, which I taught for a long time, and how we could bring in more of our Catholicism was looking at the way that God created the world and all of the patterns that there are and recognizing those patterns. And in coaching, we see the same thing. We're always paying attention to the specific words that people use to describe their thoughts, to describe events that happened. And I love that you said journaling because that has been profoundly helpful for me to look back at years and years of journaling. What are the same things that I have been praying for again and again and again? And looking at that, and my spiritual director has been very helpful too in helping me to recognize, just like you said, those places where your heart is hardened. Sometimes if my spouse brings it up even, I'm in denial that that's a thing. I don't want to go there, but it's true. It's there. It's there. And those are things that I have to just get to a place where I can face. I know you recently did a series on your podcast where you interviewed people from different temperaments on forgiveness. And we're both Metanoia certified, so I talk about the temperaments a lot on the podcast too. Do you have any big aha moments that came up in those interviews in terms of connections that you've discovered in one's ability to forgive or how easily maybe forgiveness comes according to our natural inclinations based on our temperament?
Yes, in fact, my last episode was a follow-up from someone who is a phlegmatic. And it was quite interesting the take on how phlegmatics tend to want to take it all on and who will think that, oh, I just have to get over it. Versus cholerics are like, we're going to just go right in here and we're just going to work through this process and we're just going to do this thing and then it'll be over and then we can move on. And then you have the sanguine like me is like, forget, oh, and it's not deep. It's just like skimming the surface, right? We don't want to go too deep. So for me as a sanguine choleric, definitely. And I think that's why it took me so long to do the deep, deep, deep work was because I wanted to be happy and I wanted to leave the past in the past. But with post-traumatic stress, you can't just leave the past in the past. Your brain is completely, impacted at that young age. And so it's going to bring back everything time and again. And it's just going to be, you're just going to keep working through those layers. But as a sanguine, I'm very outgoing. I love to have fun and I love to go on adventures and I love people. And so for me, forgiveness work, like I said, Lord, seriously, me? Forgive? This is a heavy topic. I don't want to be sad. I don't want to always be talking about negative things. And yet I realize that as a sanguine, it was a gift for me to be a sanguine and go through what I've gone through, because that lightness, that joy, that peace is what helped sustain me. And I think it's the same for sanguines working through really heavy things, working through a forgiveness process that involves deep, deep wounds. Sanguines can really lean into that strength of being joyful, of being open to other people, of being in community with other people. So there's definitely, I found in my interviews and in the responses that I got, that our temperaments can influence how we perceive what other people have done to us. And then also the steps that we are can influence how we approach forgiveness. Sure. Definitely.
Yeah, I am choleric sanguine, so I can relate to the I don't want to feel crummy, so I'm just going to skip over that part. If someone is coaching me, they really have to know how to get a good thought line, because I will give them a thought and I will skip to the conclusion without doing any of the middle work.
Yeah. Yes. And actually it goes hand in hand with weak boundaries, right? So I had very weak boundaries. So I was just, oh, everything's okay, especially in my marriage. Like for a long time, I carried a lot of the emotional load in my marriage because my husband is like melancholic choleric. So he was very happy with me just carrying all the emotion in our marriage. And so eventually I was like, wait a second, this isn't working out. You got to carry your stuff. I can't keep doing this with you. But I think that boundaries play a role in all of the four temperaments. And I think for some of us, for choleric, they're a little bit easier to work with in terms of knowing what their boundaries are. I think that Maddox and sanguines have a little bit more hard time with doing that because we want to just lay back and let things go.
I I think
So,
with the choleric too, it's the I don't want to waste time.
yes, yes,
I want to
yeah,
move through it. I don't want to sit here and waste any more time with this
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, so for me, I can see like over the years where the sanguine was at play and where the choleric was like, okay, we need to really, we got to get to do the business here. And then the sanguine would be like, okay, but I'm so tired. I don't want to keep doing this. And then she would take over. And then, so I can see how even in this forgiveness process, how someone might want to do the work and then kind of withdraw and then do the work and withdraw. And that's okay too. There's no right or wrong as far as how a person works through the process of forgiveness.
And with melancholics, I'm curious because they are such deep thinkers who ruminate on things and could feel those wounds, I think, so deeply just because they're going to keep reliving them in their own mind. Have you found that it takes a little more work with melancholics?
I would say yes. I would say yes. I'm married to one.
Yeah.
They need time. They need a lot of time and they need a lot of love and knowing that you're still going to be there. When they're working through their stuff, that you're still going to be there, that you're going to be safe for them to open up. And that's really key for melancholics. And I really highly encourage um, listeners to tune into that episode that I recorded with Tiffany Haller. She's a melancholic and talks very candidly about what it was like for her to end a marriage on her 25th anniversary and the forgiveness that goes along with that. So very impactful.
You've had a lot of years of work in trauma, and then you sought certification through coaching, which I know was a shift in the way that you worked with clients. How did that open up any new doorways for you, the methodology of coaching versus therapy?
Um, but I just want to clarify here, I am not a therapist. I've just experienced a lot of therapy over a long period of time. Coaching really opened my eyes as to how we can help clients see their own thinking. I love the line, I'm going to give you your brain back.
Eh,
I use that a lot in coaching because that's when you start to see clients wake up and go, oh, I didn't know that I was doing that. Oh, I didn't know that I was thinking that. Did I say that? Because so much of what we do every day is subconscious. Like 5% of our thoughts are conscious. 95% of our thoughts are in the subconscious. And so when we can get a coach to listen to us, to take notes, and then to give our brain back to us, what a gift to be able to see where we are deceiving ourselves, because we can do that all day long, every day, and where the enemy is planting those seeds of untruths and where he's steering us in a direction away from the Lord. So I think that it's really, really valuable to have a coach to be able to do that for you. So for me, in this work with trauma, I'm a forward-facing trauma coach, meaning I'm not a clinical worker. I'm not trained to do clinical work, but I can help people live healthy, happy, integrated lives through coaching. And I call myself a forgiveness guide because I can help the client see where they might still be holding on to some unforgiveness, and then help them process through it and how they want to proceed as they move forward, whether they decide to forgive or whether they decide not to forgive. It's always a choice.
yes. And you have a 5 days to forgiveness self-guided audio retreat as well. Is that correct?
I do. So I took that original retreat that I did at the church and I made a little mini retreat out of it. It's 5 days, it's 5 to 15 minutes a day. And it has a beautiful workbook that I created with it. And I've had people say, wow, I'm going to use this over and over. I'm going to keep this. It's so valuable. I love what you did here. And it is based on my book. So there are 5 readings from my book and then some reflection question. But you're working through your own, for example, you take a story or a wound that you have and you just open it up and then you just walk with the Lord every day through that process of forgiveness.
I love that. You obviously have your own book, but I know a lot of us here are book junkies and you like to read as well. Do you have a recommendation for a favorite book on forgiveness?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I don't have a favorite. I'm working my way through 3 right now. I'm actually working my way through Dr. Enright and Dr. Fitzgibbon's textbook on helping clients forgive. And I'm learning a lot about forgiveness research and forgiveness therapy. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as forgiveness therapy until I started really digging into forgiveness as, my platform. And like I said, I came into this kicking and screaming. I'm about 1.5 years into it. And I'm trying to just like drink water from a fire hose at this point. But that book is really helping me see that forgiveness in the secular world is also a struggle that people have. And I feel like for Catholics or for any Christian, I don't believe that it is possible to humanly fully forgive without grace, without the Lord walking through that process with us. And Jesus, of course, on the cross modeled that for us, what it looks like to ultimately forgive. And it's radical. It's always radical. So yeah, it's a big book. There's also a book by Father Thomas Berg, and I forget right now what the other author's name is, but it's called Choosing Forgiveness. It's another one that I'm about halfway through. I'm one of those people, I have books in different rooms.
I'm the same way.
And I have them in the car and on my Kindle.
It might take me 2 years to read one, but it will get read at some point.
Yes. And I read Immaculate's book because I read her book, and I've read so many stories of people over the years who have forgiven. And I read a book many years ago, a secular book on forgiveness, and kind of just read it. And then I was like, well, you just don't get it. And then I was like, yeah, these are great stories. It's very scientific, but you don't get it. Well, because I was coming at it from a lens of faith and just realizing that you can do that work of forgiveness. And yes, you probably will feel a sense of freedom, but it's not that sense of freedom that could lead you to beatitude. And that's what I want. I want freedom that leads to beatitude, that freedom. I want heaven.
Yes. And Immaculate's book is called Left to Tell. It just came.
That's right. Left to Tell. I read that one.
I've read that one as well. It's very good.
Yeah. Yes.
Before we get to our closing scripture verse, where can people find you if they want to connect or want to download your audio retreat?
I have a website, www.drcarron.com. That's DRCARRON.com. And just click on the link in there, and you will find everything related to my ministry, my retreat, speaking opportunities. I will be speaking at the Catholic Women's Conference in San Antonio on July 27th. So if anyone's in the area and would like to come and sit in the audience and be supportive of me in that way and just come and be with other women, I would love to see them there.
Congratulations.
Thank
That is so
you.
exciting.
Yeah,
I
thank you for
hear
coming.
I hear of someone speaking or presenting. I'm in Nebraska, and no one is ever in Nebraska presenting. Maybe one of these days.
Yes, maybe that will be you.
Yeah, maybe it will be me. The scripture verse that you chose today was John chapter 15, verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you from the world to go and bear fruit, says the Lord. Why that particular verse?
It's interesting. I chose this verse. I was doing just a morning reflection, and this scripture verse came up. I think it was in the daily reading at some point this year. And I wrote it on a little sticky note. It's right here in front of me. And then I was invited to be on the Women's Acts retreat team. And our theme for the Acts retreat was that verse. And then it's just been popping up everywhere. And I reflected on, okay, Lord, what is it with this verse? And I was always struggling with, why me? Why did I leave South Africa out of all of my family? What was the purpose for me to overcome so much adversity, to overcome the trauma that I've experienced? And it's that he goes, well, to bear fruit. And what I am now discovering is the fruit that I am supposed to be bearing. And it is to spread this message that everything on this planet can be redeemed. Anything can be forgiven. And that's a hard message to give, and it's a hard message to hear. That I'm speaking it.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you like it or not, I'm going to say it.
I think it's wonderful. You've had so many great phrases about forgiveness that I hope people go back and listen to this again and go back and check out your podcast and be willing to do the work. Be willing to do the work, because it truly is freedom. And I want to remind everyone listening as well, Carron said she had 30 years of doing the work and is still doing the work before starting to really see the fruit and understand why God chose her for this. And so
Yeah.
if you're in the middle of your 30 years or the beginning or the end, however long that lasts for you in your particular mission, just remember to keep going. Like she said at the beginning, you just keep going and you don't understand it, but at some point you will.
Yes, and stay close to him. I always encourage people to go to adoration. Jesus is there. He is waiting for you. He wants to love you. Just go. Just sit there. You don't even have to say a word. If your mind drifts, let it. Let him change you right there. It's okay. Take the pain, take that unforgiveness that you have in your heart, and just go tell him, I don't want to forgive. He can take it. I've done it so many times. I really don't want to forgive this person. I'm still angry. He'll take it.
I
So
have my
yeah.
I have my biggest breakthroughs in adoration. There are weeks, so I have set holy hours, and there are weeks when there are storms or something happens and I can't go. And my week is just different. It's different when I don't have that. So start going, make it a consistent thing, and I promise you, you will see a difference in your life.
You will. You will. I promise you to. Take my word for it. If you don't want to take my word for it, go try it out.
Yes. Thank you so much. You were such a blessing. I can't wait to hear more on your podcast, and I will be praying for you and for all of the retreatants and your clients who are doing this beautiful and very difficult work to not only heal themselves, but grow closer to Christ.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful souls, thank you again for journeying with me. If you have been blessed by this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your social media stories, and don't forget to tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Kylie M. Hine. Stay persistent in prayer, protect your peace, and as always, share the light of Christ with everyone around you.